Ade and Tunde were close friends from Igboro village, bound by their school days and shared childhood memories. Every holiday they returned home to their village, a place surrounded by lush green farmlands and hard-working people. Life in Igboro was simple but not easy. Families depended on farming to survive, and children often joined in to help. Kunle, Ade's school friend, sometimes visited Igboro to spend holidays with his friend. Though he didn't know Tunde well, his friendship with Ade made him feel at home in the village. Then there was Seyi, a true son of Igboro. Unlike the others, he had never been to school. Instead, he spent his days helping his poor parents on their small piece of land. Seyi had the strength of someone who had worked hard all his life, and the sharpness of someone who knew how to survive. When the holidays arrived, Ade and Seyi teamed up, as they always did, to look for farm jobs in the area. They were known for being diligent workers, clearing bushes, planting crops, and harvesting yams. These jobs paid in cash, foodstuffs, or both, which helped their families get through tough times. This holiday, the boys wanted to go beyond the usual. Instead of sticking to jobs within Igboro, they decided to explore neighbouring villages like Ilupeju and Araromi. They planned to take up as many jobs as they could and earn enough for the holiday. Their first job in Alafia was a blessing. The farmer, an elderly man, paid them generously in both cash and food. The boys returned home tired but happy, sharing stories of their hard work and dreams of more opportunities. "This is just the beginning," Ade said to Seyi as they carried sacks of yams home. "If we keep working like this, we'll make enough money to last us even after school resumes." Seyi grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "We just need to find the right people to work for. The farmers here in Ilupeju seem to pay well." Encouraged by their success, the boys took on a job at the farm of Chief Olanrewaju, a wealthy man in Ilupeju. Chief Olanrewaju's land was large, and the work was intense, clearing weeds, building ridges, and planting maize. Despite his immense wealth and the fact that all his children lived abroad, enjoying luxurious lives, he was notorious for underpaying labourers, exploiting their hard work for minimal pay. "This job will give us a huge profit," they thought. The boys worked tirelessly for a week, pushing through the heat and exhaustion, motivated by the hope of earning enough to help their families. At the end of the week, Chief Olanrewaju handed them their payment, but their excitement quickly turned to disappointment. The money he gave them was shockingly small, far less than what they deserved for the grueling labour they had endured. "Is this all?" Seyi asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. Chief Olanrewaju smirked. "Take it or leave it," he said dismissively. "You should be grateful I even paid you." The boys stared at the meagre sum in their hands, their hearts heavy with frustration and humiliation. They had worked tirelessly under the scorching sun, only to be paid a fraction of what their efforts were worth. "But we worked for you," Ade protested, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Chief Olanrewaju's eyes darkened. "Do you think you can come here and make demands? Leave now, or you'll regret it." When the boys refused to leave, Chief Olanrewaju grabbed a dagger and charged at them. The sight of the glinting blade in his hands made their hearts race. They dropped everything and ran, narrowly escaping the furious man. Ade and Seyi left Chief Olanrewaju's farm that day, feeling humiliated and heartbroken. They couldn't understand why Chief Olanrewaju had treated them so cruelly. They had worked hard under the scorching sun with no complaints. To be chased off with a cutlass was bad enough, but to then be accused of stealing his farm produce was a wound that cut even deeper. "We swear, Chief, we never and can never do that," Ade cried, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. "Lying thieves," Chief Olanrewaju roared, his face twisted with anger. "If I catch you near my farm again, I'll make sure you regret it." That evening, back in Igboro village, Seyi told Kunle everything. Kunle listened intently, anger bubbling in his chest as Seyi narrated Chief Olanrewaju's attitude. He couldn't understand how someone could be so heartless. "This is not right," Kunle said firmly. "We can't let him get away with this." "But what can we do?" Seyi asked helplessly. "He's too powerful." Kunle thought for a moment, then leaned closer. "If he won't pay us fairly, we'll teach him a lesson. His wealth comes from this farm, doesn't it? Let's take some of his farm products and make up for what he cheated us out of." Seyi hesitated but nodded reluctantly. "You're right. He won't even notice it's gone with how much he has." The boys made their plan. They decided to return to Chief Olanrewaju's farm under the cover of darkness, taking enough to balance the scales, but not enough to raise immediate suspicion. For them, it wasn't theft. It was justice for the back-breaking work they had done. Aid, sitting nearby, frowned. "I don't think that's a good idea. What if things go wrong? Maybe we should tell our parents or report him to the king." Seyi shook his head. "Do you really think the king will help us? Chief Olanrewaju is a wealthy man respected by everyone. They'll believe him over us." Kunle, still burning with frustration, agreed. "Seyi is right. Chief Olanrewaju has shown us wickedness. If we try to play fair, we'll never get justice." Aid was uneasy but didn't push further. The majority had spoken. Later that night, Seyi approached Tunde and convinced him to join their plan. "You're our friend," he said. "We need you. We can't let Chief Olanrewaju get away with this." Tunde agreed to help his friends. At 5 a.m., when the sky was still dark, the four boys gathered near Chief Olanrewaju's farm. Each carried a sack and a cutlass, though their intention wasn't to harm but to teach him a lesson. They moved quietly, careful not to wake the farmhands or attract attention. The air was thick with tension as they slipped into the farmland. The boys began harvesting yams and maize, just enough to reflect the amount they believed they were owed for their hard work. They whispered to one another as they worked quickly, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. To them, this was not theft, but justice for being exploited by a man who had more than enough to pay them fairly. As the boys moved quietly through Chief Olanrewaju's farmland, filling their sacks with yams and maize, they were careful to avoid making noise. They worked quickly, whispering to one another and keeping an eye on the farmhouse in the distance. Just as they were about to leave, satisfied they had taken enough to teach the chief a lesson, fate turned against them. One of the farmhands, who had risen early to begin his duties, noticed movement among the crops. At first, he thought it might be animals, but as he moved closer, he spotted the boys. Alarmed, he ran back to the house, shouting, "Thieves! Thieves in the farm!" The commotion woke Chief Olanrewaju, who rushed outside, followed by other farmhands and his family members. They grabbed torches and weapons, storming toward the boys, who were still in the farmland, unaware they had been discovered. Before the boys could react, the chief and his farmhands surrounded them. "What do you think you're doing?" Chief Olanrewaju bellowed, his voice cutting through the early morning air. The boys froze, their sacks of stolen crops lying at their feet. Seyi, trembling, tried to explain. "We just took what we deserved. You didn't pay us fairly." "Deserved?" Chief Olanrewaju interrupted, his face dark with fury. "You call stealing from my farm deserved? You are nothing but criminals." The farmhands grabbed the boys, yanking the sacks from their hands. The chief inspected the stolen crops, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "You thought you could rob me and get away with it?" Seyi and Kunle tried to plead their case, but their words fell on deaf ears. "We only wanted what we earned," Kunle shouted, desperation in his voice. "Silence!" the chief roared. "You've insulted me, disrespected my land, and now you'll face the consequences." As more villagers gathered, drawn by the noise, the situation spiraled out of control. The crowd began accusing the boys of being common thieves, unwilling to hear their side of the story. Chief Olanrewaju stood tall, feeding the narrative that the boys had come to harm him and steal his property. Before the boys could defend themselves, they were swarmed. Blows rained down on them from every direction, fists, sticks, and anything else the mob could grab. The boys screamed, pleading for someone to listen, but no one cared to hear their side of the story. "Chief Olanrewaju can never lie," someone shouted. "These boys are criminals." The beating continued until the boys were too weak to move. Bloodied and bruised, they were dragged to the village square as the crowd's fury reached its peak. The boys tried to plead one last time, but their voices were drowned out by the angry cries of the mob who believed they were delivering justice. At 6 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The crowd, in their fury, set the boys on fire. Their screams echoed through the village, but no one stepped forward to save them. To the villagers, they were criminals who had tried to rob and kill a respected chief. Justice in their eyes had been served. Justice in their eyes had been served. The news spread quickly. By midday, neighbouring villages like Ijebu and Ife had heard of the 4 boys who were burned to death for allegedly trying to rob Chief Olanrewaju. Most people accepted the story without question, believing that Olanrewaju, a man of wealth and status, couldn't possibly lie. The evening turned to night in Ilupeju village, and the Bakare household was filled with unease. Mr. and Mrs. Bakare, Tunde's parents, sat outside their small mud house, watching the dark sky anxiously. The firewood Mrs. Bakare had been using to cook dinner was long burnt out, but her son Tunde had still not returned home. "Where is Tunde?" Mrs. Bakare muttered to herself, pacing back and forth. "He always comes back before sunset. What is keeping him this late?" Mr. Bakare tried to reassure her, though he was equally worried. "Don't worry too much. Maybe he's with his friends, those boys he always works with during the holidays." But when the hours dragged on and Tunde still didn't come home, worry turned into panic. Mr. Bakare decided to visit the families of his friends to see if their son was with them. The stories turned the same. The families were looking for their sons too. By midnight, the families of the boys had gathered together, their faces etched with fear. The boys were missing, and no one had any idea where they could be. They had heard about the death of 4 criminals at Umuobi village, but they could not trace it to their sons because it couldn't be possible. As the day went on and the boys still didn't return, their families grew more convinced that the worst had happened. With no other options, they decided to take the matter to their king, the respected ruler of their village. The families knelt before the king, their voices trembling with grief. Mr. Bakare spoke on behalf of the others. "My king," he began, "our sons have been missing since yesterday. We have reason to believe they are the 4 boys who were killed in Umuobi. Tunde once told me that he got a job offer at Umuobi village. Please, my king, help us. We need answers." The king sent a message to the king of Ubi, demanding a clear report on the death of the 4 boys. The king, not knowing much about it, called Chief Olanrewaju to narrate his experience with the 4 boys. Olanrewaju straightened his voice steady. "My king, the boys came to my farm late at night. They took yams and maize from my fields without permission. When I confronted them, they claimed it was payment for a job they had done for me. I told them they were trespassers and thieves." The king's eyes narrowed slightly. "And how did they end up dead?" Olanrewaju hesitated before answering. "When I called for help, my farmhands and neighbours rushed in to stop them. The boys resisted and refused to leave. The people were angry and felt the boys should pay for their crime, and things got out of hand." The king leaned forward. "Got out of hand? Chief Olanrewaju, are you saying that the crowd acted without your orders?" Olanrewaju nodded quickly. "Yes, my king. I had no control over their actions." The king's expression remained unreadable. In the end, with no evidence, he concluded that the boys were thieves. Chief Olanrewaju was a man of influence, but deep down, he knew he was in trouble. The truth of what happened between him and the boys could destroy him. To save himself, he twisted the story, labeling the 4 boys as criminals who had come to rob him. He never mentioned the real incident, the boys taking the farm products as payment for the work they had done. He kept that part buried. The problem, however, was that the boys had not told their families about working for Olanrewaju. Seyi and Kunle hadn't mentioned anything to their parents about the unpaid job, so there was no way for their families to connect the dots. Without solid evidence, the case grew cold and the villagers began to move on, hoping that somehow the boys would return home someday. As the weeks passed, the situation remained unresolved. The holiday came to an end and families began to prepare for life as usual. Mr. and Mrs. Bakare, Kunle's parents, expected their son to return home to the city after the holidays, but he never came. At first, they thought there might be a delay, but after a month with no word from him, they grew anxious. One fateful day, they decided to travel to Ilupeju village to find out what was happening. When they arrived, they were greeted with a heartbreaking revelation. Kunle, along with 3 other boys, Seyi, Tunde, and Ade, had been missing for over a month. Worse still, the villagers shared the haunting tale of 4 boys burned alive in Umuobi village, accused of being criminals. This event happened the same day the boys went missing. Mrs. Bakare broke down in tears upon hearing this. "No, my son is not a thief," she cried, her voice echoing through the compound. "Kunle would never rob anyone. He is a good boy." Mr. Bakare clenched his fists in anger. "We demand answers. How could this happen? Who gave them the right to kill those boys without proper investigation?" But the villagers could provide no answers. The story was shrouded in doubt and confusion, and without any evidence to prove that the burned boys were Kunle and his friends, the case seemed hopeless. Refusing to accept defeat, Mr. and Mrs. Bakare decided to escalate the matter. They reported the case to the state police, demanding a full investigation into the deaths of the 4 boys in Umuobi village. The authorities listened, and within 12 hours, a team of officers arrested Chief Olanrewaju and several of his farmhands. At the police station, Olanrewaju was charged with taking the law into his own hands and burning the boys' bodies before sunrise, making it impossible to identify them. The police accused him of intentionally covering up the truth to avoid accountability. During a search of Olanrewaju's house, a shocking discovery was made: a golden necklace belonging to Kunle. It was a precious piece that had belonged to Kunle's mother before he travelled down to the village to see Seyi. Olanrewaju admitted that he had taken the necklace during the beating, knowing it was valuable. When the families were informed about the discovery, they broke down in tears. There was no longer any doubt. The boys who had been beaten and burned were their sons. The family's pain deepened as they realised the extent of Olanrewaju's cruelty. With the evidence mounted against him, Olanrewaju was taken to court for trial. The families of the boys were present, along with villagers from both Ilupeju and Umuobi. The courtroom was packed as everyone awaited the outcome of the case. Under pressure from the prosecution and the evidence presented, Olanrewaju finally broke down and confessed. He admitted that the boys had come to his farm to take yams and maize as payment for the work they had done for him. He explained that the boys believed he had cheated them, so they took the crops without his permission. Instead of handling the situation properly, Olanrewaju escalated it, calling for his farmhands and neighbours to attack them. Olanrewaju confessed to ordering the mob to beat the boys and burn their bodies in the village square. He also admitted to taking Kunle's golden necklace during the chaos, knowing its worth. His words sent a wave of anger and sorrow through the courtroom. When it was time for the judgment, the judge showed no mercy. Olanrewaju was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labour for his crimes. His farmhands, who participated in the mob attack, were also sentenced to 20 years in prison. As the families left the courtroom, tears streamed down their faces. The memory of their sons would forever haunt them, but they found some comfort in knowing that the truth had finally been revealed and Olanrewaju would pay for his wickedness. The tragic deaths of Seyi, Kunle, Tunde, and Ade caused a rift that tore apart the peace between Ilupeju and Umuobi villages. For weeks, the violence continued. Clashes broke out on different occasions, often leaving people injured and properties damaged. The elders of both villages tried to calm things down, but the wounds caused by the deaths of the 4 boys were too deep. Ilupeju demanded justice not just for the boys, but for the harm done to their reputation. The story of Seyi, Kunle, Tunde, and Adi became a painful tale passed down from one generation to the next.